What if everything you rely on, comfort, convenience, distraction, every small escape you use to soften reality, every habit that makes life feel easier, lighter, more tolerable, was stripped away overnight? No warning, no gradual adjustment, no time to prepare your mind for what's coming. Just gone. The soft bed replaced with hard ground. The endless scrolling replaced with silence. The instant gratification replaced with delay, resistance, effort. No shortcuts, no excuses, no carefully constructed reasons that let you off the hook when things get uncomfortable. No second chances to try again tomorrow. Because tomorrow doesn't care about your intentions. Tomorrow doesn't reset your failures. Tomorrow simply exposes what you refuse to do today. Only one standard remains. Discipline so absolute, it doesn't negotiate. It doesn't bend for your mood. It doesn't pause for your doubts. It doesn't wait for motivation to show up and give you permission to act. It demands action, regardless. It demands consistency, without emotion. It demands that you move forward, even when every part of you wants to retreat. Now ask yourself honestly, not the version of you that speaks when everything is comfortable, not the version of you that makes promises in moments of inspiration, but the version of you that shows up when things get hard. Could modern society survive that? A world built on convenience, on speed, on comfort being just one click away. A system designed to remove friction, not embrace it. To entertain the mind, not train it. To reward ease, not endurance. What happens when that system is gone? What happens when there's no algorithm to distract you? No comfort to retreat into? No safety net to catch you when you fall short? Would people adapt? Or would they hesitate? Freeze. Search for an escape that no longer exists? Because discipline at that level doesn't ask if you feel ready. It doesn't care if you're tired. It doesn't slow down because you're overwhelmed. It becomes the standard, the only standard, and anything below it breaks. So the real question isn't whether society could handle it. The real question is, what happens to you when there is nothing left to rely on except your ability to endure? There was a time when discipline wasn't optional. It wasn't something you chose when you felt inspired. It wasn't something you postponed when life became inconvenient. And it certainly wasn't something you could ignore without consequence. It wasn't a productivity hack, not a carefully optimized morning routine designed to make you feel in control for a few hours. Not a trending self-improvement concept that rises and falls with attention spans. It was identity. It was the line between order and chaos, between survival and collapse, between honor and irrelevance. For the samurai, discipline wasn't something they practiced. It was something they became. Not occasionally, not when it was convenient, not when motivation aligned with action. Always. Every action, every decision, every movement of the body, every thought that crossed the mind was filtered through a code so precise, so unforgiving, that even the smallest deviation had weight. There was no separation between who they were and what they did. No gap between intention and execution. Every breath carried awareness. Every moment demanded presence. Every choice reflected a standard that could not be negotiated. And hesitation? Hesitation wasn't just a flaw. It was a liability. Because in a world where consequences were immediate, where a single moment of doubt could cost everything, there was no room for internal conflict. You either acted or you didn't survive long enough to question it. Now compare that to today, a world engineered for comfort, not by accident, but by design. A system built to eliminate resistance, to smooth every edge of reality until friction becomes unfamiliar. Built on instant gratification, where desire and fulfillment are separated by seconds, not effort. Food arrives before hunger becomes uncomfortable. Before your body even has time to register need, it's already satisfied. Entertainment appears before boredom can even fully form. Before your mind is forced to confront silence, it's flooded with noise. An escape? Escape is always one tap away. One swipe, one click, from discomfort, from responsibility, from the very moments that once forced growth. There is always an exit, always a way out. So the question isn't just philosophical. It's not some abstract idea meant for debate or reflection. It's uncomfortable, because it forces you to confront a reality most people avoid. Can a society addicted to ease handle a system built on absolute discipline? A system that doesn't care about comfort, that doesn't adjust itself to your preferences, that doesn't slow down to match your pace. A system that demands alignment, not excuses. What happens when the environment no longer carries you? When convenience disappears? When distraction loses its grip? When there's nothing left to soften the weight of responsibility? Do people adapt? Or do they resist, searching for the same comfort that no longer exists? Because absolute discipline doesn't integrate into a life built on ease. It replaces it. It strips away everything unnecessary, everything weak, everything dependent, until only one thing remains: you, and your ability to act without hesitation. Chapter 1. The illusion of discipline. Modern discipline is often misunderstood. Not slightly misunderstood, completely distorted. People reduce it to something comfortable, something flexible, something that can be turned on and off depending on how they feel that day. They think it's about motivation, about catching a wave of energy and riding it as far as it goes. They think it's about feeling ready, about aligning your emotions with your actions before you begin, about waiting for the right mindset, the perfect mental state where everything feels clear, easy, effortless. But that version of discipline, it's an illusion, because samurai-level discipline doesn't care about mindset. It doesn't ask how you feel before it moves. It doesn't pause to check if you're motivated, or inspired, or emotionally prepared. It operates regardless. Whether you're tired, whether you're distracted, whether your mind is filled with resistance. It moves anyway. That's the first fracture. The first point where modern thinking collapses under the weight of real discipline. Because modern society has conditioned people to act based on emotion, to treat feelings as signals, not just of experience, but of permission. I don't feel like it. I'm not in the right mood. I'll start tomorrow, when I have more energy, when things feel easier, when I'm more focused. These aren't just thoughts. They're habits, deeply embedded patterns that dictate behavior without being questioned. And over time, they become rules. Invisible rules that control when people act and when they don't. But under true discipline, those phrases don't exist. They have no function, no authority, no influence over action. Because action is no longer negotiated internally. It's executed, whether the mind agrees or resists, whether the body feels ready or not. There is no internal debate, no hesitation loop where thoughts argue against responsibility. There is only movement, forward. And that's where most people break. Not at the level of complexity, not because the task is impossible, not because they lack intelligence or potential or ability, but because they've been trained, conditioned, reinforced to require emotional permission before they act. They've learned to wait for a feeling that may never come, to depend on a state that isn't consistent, to delay action until it feels comfortable. And when that comfort disappears, so does their consistency, so does their discipline, because the system they rely on was never built for resistance. It was built for ease. But samurai-level discipline? It was built in resistance, forged inside it, refined by it. It doesn't collapse when things get hard. That's when it activates. And if you've never learned to operate without emotional permission, then the moment resistance appears is the moment everything stops. Chapter 2. Comfort as a weakness. Comfort isn't just a luxury anymore. It's not something you earn after enduring difficulty, not something you step into after pushing through resistance. It's a default setting, a baseline, something you wake up into without questioning it. Temperature-controlled environments that adjust before you even notice discomfort. Instant communication that removes the tension of waiting, of uncertainty, of silence. Endless entertainment loops that fill every empty space in your mind before boredom has a chance to exist. Every inconvenience, every delay, every form of friction that once tested patience and endurance has been engineered out of existence. Not by accident, but by design. A system built to make life smoother, faster, easier. But there's a cost. Because discipline doesn't grow in comfort. It never has. Discipline is not built in ease. It's built in resistance. In moments where the mind wants to stop, but you continue. Where the body resists, but you push forward anyway. That's where structure is formed. That's where control is developed. The samurai understood this. They didn't wait for ideal conditions. They didn't optimize their environment for comfort before they acted. They trained in discomfort. Cold mornings where the body resisted movement, but movement happened anyway. Relentless repetition that stripped away boredom, stripped away emotion, until only precision remained. Unforgiving consequences where mistakes weren't softened, They were felt, fully. There was no escape from hardship. No pause button. No alternative path that made things easier. They didn't avoid difficulty. They built themselves inside it. They allowed resistance to shape them, to refine their reactions, to eliminate hesitation. Because over time, discomfort stopped feeling like an obstacle. It became normal, expected, even necessary. Now compare that to modern society, a system that avoids friction at all costs, where inconvenience is seen as a problem to eliminate, not a condition to adapt to, where effort is minimized and ease is maximized. Everything is designed to reduce strain, to remove pressure, to keep you within a zone where nothing feels too difficult, too uncomfortable, too demanding. And that creates a dangerous imbalance, because growth requires resistance, but the environment removes it. So what happens? The ability to handle discomfort weakens, slowly, quietly, almost invisibly, until one moment changes everything. Because the moment real pressure appears, uncertainty, loss, failure, situations that cannot be controlled, cannot be softened, cannot be escaped. There's no foundation to stand on, no internal structure to absorb the impact. Just reaction, instinctive, untrained reaction. Just panic, a mind searching for the same comfort it's been conditioned to expect, but can't find. Just collapse, not always physical, often mental, emotional, a breakdown in clarity, in control, in decision-making. Not because people are inherently weak, but because they've been trained to be comfortable, conditioned to operate in environments where pressure is rare, where resistance is optional, where discomfort can always be avoided. So when reality stops cooperating, when it refuses to bend, when it demands strength instead of offering ease, there's nothing prepared to meet it, because comfort was never meant to be the foundation. And once it becomes one, everything built on top of it becomes fragile. Chapter 3. The Cost of Absolute Standards. Samurai discipline comes with a price most people are not willing to pay. Not because it's hidden, not because it's complicated, but because it is completely uncompromising. No shortcuts, no compromise, no selective effort. It doesn't adjust itself to your energy levels. It doesn't lower the standard when you feel overwhelmed. It doesn't rewrite the rules based on circumstance. It demands consistency at a level that eliminates excuses completely, not reduces them, not manages them, eliminates them. And that is where modern thinking begins to fracture under pressure. Because today, balance is prioritized, not as a tool for sustainability, but often as a permission structure. Don't be too hard on yourself. Take it easy. Rest when you feel like it. You can always do it later when you're in a better headspace. On the surface, these statements sound reasonable, even healthy, and in the right context, recovery absolutely has its place. But over time, this mindset often shifts, quietly, subtly, until it stops being about recovery and starts becoming about avoidance. A shield for inconsistency, a justification for delay, a way to soften the impact of not doing what was required. Because it introduces something dangerous into discipline. Negotiation, the ability to debate with responsibility, to argue with necessity, to decide whether or not effort will be given based on internal conditions. And once negotiation enters the system, discipline stops being absolute. It becomes conditional, selective, fragile. Samurai discipline removes negotiation entirely. There is no internal courtroom where excuses are presented and evaluated. No emotional vote that determines whether action is approved. No waiting for the mind to reach consensus before movement begins. There is only execution. You do what must be done, whether it is convenient or not, whether it is comfortable or not, whether the timing feels right or not. Because the standard is not shaped by circumstances. It stands above them. And that level of standard isn't just difficult. It is suffocating to anyone who has never been trained to operate under it. Because it removes the space where most people currently live. The space between intention and action. Between knowing what should be done and deciding when it feels acceptable to do it. That space disappears. And what replaces it is pressure. Constant, unyielding, immediate. And that is why most people reject it before they even try to understand it. Not because they have examined it deeply, not because they have tested it against their limits, but because instinctively, they recognize what it demands. It demands the removal of comfort as a decision-making tool. It demands identity-level consistency. It demands a version of the self that does not fluctuate with mood or circumstance. And for a system built on flexibility, ease, and emotional permission, that kind of standard doesn't feel inspiring. It feels impossible. So it is dismissed. Not because it is weak, but because it is absolute. Chapter 4. Identity versus habit. Here's the real difference most people never fully confront. Modern discipline is treated like a habit. Something mechanical. Something temporary. Something you try to build through repetition and motivation cycles. You start strong. You lose momentum. You fall off. And then you restart. Over and over again. A loop of beginnings without permanence. A cycle of effort without transformation. But samurai discipline doesn't exist in that framework. It is not a habit. It is identity. And identity does not operate on fluctuation. You don't wake up and decide to be disciplined. You don't negotiate with yourself each morning based on how you feel. You don't evaluate whether today is a good day for consistency. You are disciplined or you are not. There is no middle ground where it partially exists. No reduced version of it depending on mood or circumstance. No temporary state you enter when things feel convenient. No on-off switch. No break days from who you are. No alternate version of yourself that exists when responsibility feels heavy. Because once discipline becomes identity, it stops being something you perform. It becomes something you embody. And that level of identity requires something most people actively avoid. Self-confrontation. Not the surface-level version where you feel guilty for a moment and then move on. Not the performative reflection where you acknowledge flaws without changing anything. But direct confrontation. Looking at your own inconsistency without escaping it. Your own excuses without softening them. Your own patterns of avoidance without rationalizing them. Not to judge yourself. Not to punish yourself. But to eliminate what cannot coexist with the standard you claim to want. Because under absolute discipline, there is no room for contradiction. No space for repeated cycles of, "I'll do better next time," without actual change. No tolerance for awareness without action. Everything that weakens you is identified. Everything that delays you is exposed. Everything that keeps you inconsistent is brought into focus. And then it is removed. Not gradually. Not in a comfortable progression that lets you adjust slowly while staying unchanged at your core. But completely. Because absolute discipline does not integrate weakness and hope it improves over time. It replaces it. And what remains after that process is not a better version of your habits. It is a different version of your identity. One where discipline is no longer something you reach for, but something you no longer separate yourself from. Chapter 5. Why most people would fail. Let's be direct. If modern society were suddenly forced into samurai-level discipline, not as an idea, not as inspiration, but as a requirement for daily existence, most people wouldn't adapt. They would resist. Not loudly at first, not in obvious rebellion, but internally, through hesitation, through delay, through subtle rejection of anything that demands too much consistency. Because the system they rely on would no longer support them. No more external motivation to push them forward. No more endless chances to fix it later. No more comfort cushioning the impact of failure so it feels survivable. Just responsibility. Immediate, unfiltered, unavoidable. And responsibility at that level is heavy, not because it is complicated, but because it removes everything that normally absorbs pressure for you. It exposes everything. Your habits, when no one is watching. Your mindset, when things stop feeling easy. Your limits, when excuses no longer hold weight. And without preparation, that exposure is not motivating. It is overwhelming. Because most people have never been required to stand inside that kind of clarity. They are used to buffers. Space between action and consequence. Time between failure and correction. Systems that soften the impact of inconsistency. So when those buffers disappear, the reaction is not elevation. It is escape. People don't always run physically. More often, they retreat mentally. They distract themselves, filling silence with noise so they don't have to think about what they failed to do. Filling time with consumption so they don't have to confront stillness. They rationalize, rewriting the situation in their mind until it feels acceptable again, turning absence of discipline into a temporary circumstance instead of a pattern. They delay, pushing responsibility forward just far enough to avoid facing it in the present moment. Anything at all, to avoid standing directly in front of a standard that does not adjust itself to their comfort. Because that is the real pressure point. Not the difficulty of the task, but the absence of negotiation. A standard that does not bend, does not pause, does not accommodate hesitation. And when a system like that is introduced into a life built around flexibility and ease, the instinct is not adaptation. It is avoidance. And that is the reality most people don't want to admit. Not that they lack potential, not that they lack intelligence, not that they lack capability, but that they have been trained, over time, to survive in environments where discipline is optional, and collapse becomes likely the moment it is not. Chapter 6. But here's the truth. Modern society as a whole. No, it cannot handle samurai-level discipline. Not in its current state. Not with its current structure. Not with its dependence on comfort, speed, and constant external stimulation. Because systems reflect the people inside them. And when the environment is built around convenience, the average behavior will always drift toward convenience. So as a collective system, it collapses under that standard. Not immediately, not dramatically, but inevitably. Because absolute discipline is not compatible with a structure designed to minimize resistance at every turn. But individuals? That's a completely different reality. Because discipline was never something society could grant you. It was never distributed evenly, never enforced universally, never dependent on external approval. Discipline is chosen, quietly, individually, without announcement, without recognition, without permission. It is not something you wait for the world to support. It is something you decide to embody regardless of the world around you. You don't need society to change to operate at a higher standard. You don't need perfect conditions to remove excuses. You don't need external pressure to build internal control. In fact, relying on those things is exactly what weakens discipline in the first place. Because it shifts responsibility outward. It turns consistency into something conditional, something dependent, something fragile. And the moment conditions change, discipline breaks. But when discipline is internal, when it is self-contained, when it is not waiting for anything external to validate it, that is where the shift happens. Not in society, not in systems, not in culture, but in the individual who refuses to follow its patterns. The person who notices the default behaviors around them and chooses not to mirror them. Who sees convenience as an option, not a command. Who understands that ease is available, but not authoritative. Because at that level, discipline is no longer about resistance to the world. It becomes resistance to conditioning. And that changes everything. Not loudly, not visibly, not in a way that demands recognition, but internally, in the quiet decision to act when action is required, even when nothing is pushing you. In the refusal to negotiate with excuses that used to feel normal. In the steady rejection of patterns that keep most people consistent only when it is easy. That is the real divide. Not society versus discipline, but individuals who follow the pattern, and individuals who break it. So the real question isn't whether society can handle it. It's whether you can. Not in theory, where everything sounds possible. Not in motivation, where energy briefly makes discipline feel natural. Not in temporary bursts of effort, where intensity replaces consistency for a short time, but in something far less dramatic and far more revealing. Consistency, when no one is watching, when there is no pressure from others, no expectation to meet, no audience to impress, no consequence that arrives immediately if you fail, just you and the choice in front of you. In action, when you don't feel like it, when the mind offers resistance without reason, when every internal signal points toward delay, and stopping would feel easier than continuing. And yet, you continue. In discipline, when comfort is easier, when avoidance is available, when distraction is one decision away and feels completely justified. Because that is the true environment discipline is tested in. Not in extremes, not in moments of inspiration, but in ordinary decisions that no one will ever notice, except you. Because that's where the line is drawn. Between those who rely on the system and those who operate beyond it, those who depend on structure, timing, mood, and external push to stay consistent, and those who generate structure internally, regardless of circumstance. One waits for the right moment, for conditions to align, for readiness to arrive. The other doesn't wait. It becomes it. If this made you uncomfortable, good. That means you're seeing the gap. Now the decision is simple. Close it, or keep living inside it. Subscribe to the Cipher Phantom. Because we don't chase motivation here. We build something far more dangerous. Control.